Let's talk about fragments. Fragments are a major writing mistake that's going to cost you a lot of points on your essay. So let's talk about how to find them and probably most importantly, how to fix them once we have found them. Fragments are basically incomplete sentences that you have made look like a real sentence. They start with a capital letter and they end with a period. But as you can tell there from the examples on your screen, there's just something missing. And usually, what's missing from a fragment is you have left out the subject. Now, this one doesn't happen very often, but it has been known to happen in students' writing. So, always check to make sure that you have a subject in your sentences. Sometimes students leave out the verb. Again, not usually the way that fragments are made in students' writing. Students know their sentence has to do something, but it is worth checking just to make sure that your sentence does have an action word or a helping verb of some sort in the sentence. Usually, what happens in students' writing is they've left out the complete thought. Take a look at that first sentence that you see up there on the screen. If you don't stop spending money, what's going to happen? The thought has been left out. And this is generally the way that students make fragment mistakes when they're writing in their essay. So, why do fragments happen? There are a couple different reasons that we're going to talk about today. The first happens when you go back to revise your paper. You found a really good sentence in your essay, but you realize you left some information out. And so you go back and you add that information in. And sometimes when we add that information in, we don't put it in sentence form. And you see here in your wrong example, our original sentence was there are a lot of good places to get a good hamburger in Dallas. So during the revising stage, we thought we might list out a couple of those places that a person can go. But you see here in that wrong example, there is no verb in that sentence. And so even though it looks like a sentence on your screen, it's missing our verb. So we would need to go back and add in our verb, or we would need to find a way to attach it to the sentence that we are adding information about here. The second reason a fragment sentence happens is because students think they have a verb in their sentence when they do not. And this generally happens when the first word in your sentence ends with the letters ing. Talk about it in an earlier video that I have, but anytime you put ing on the end of a verb, it's no longer a verb. And so when you start sentences with the letters, with a word that ends in ing, make sure you double or triple check that sentence to make sure you have a verb somewhere else in that sentence. And for example, here, our verbs in this sentence are now tripped and broke. Okay. And then the word hit down there as well. You can also run into some fragments when you start a sentence with the word to. Sometimes this leads to you not putting in the complete thought. And generally, what happens when you start a sentence with the word to is you probably need to hook it to the one behind it, or you need to make sure that you have that complete thought coming through in your sentence. The fourth reason that fragments happen here is you started the sentence with a subordinating conjunction. And we talk about subordinating conjunctions in another one of the videos that I have for you. But anytime you start a sentence with one of those words, chances are you don't really have the complete idea, because something that is subordinate is dependent on something else to have happen. We need to make sure we have that complete relationship present in the sentence that we're writing. For instance, the sentence is wrong here because you did not turn your paper in on time. There's something missing here. I need to make sure that I have either the consequence or the cause, whatever it is I left out. I need to make sure I have that in my paper. So now that we've taught you the four most common ways that fragments happen in your paper, how do we fix these things? And there's really two easy fixes. Read your paper out loud. If something sounds funny to you, chances are it was written incorrectly. And so just by reading your paper out loud, you're much more likely to identify a fragment. Again, also double check any sentence that starts with a subordinating conjunction, a preposition, a word that ends in ing, starts with the word to, some of those other examples. Sometimes we give ourselves red flags to double check the way that we write. Once we've identified the fragment, it becomes time to fix that fragment. And usually fragments can be fixed very, very easily. Just add in the subject. If you have a subject, add in your verb. If you have a subject and a verb, chances are you left out the complete thought. Just make sure the sentence makes sense when you get done with it. Sometimes it's as easy as removing the period between the main clause and the fragment. If you think back to example one that we talked about, when you go back and you add that information in, sometimes you started a new sentence and you really could have just hooked it up to the sentence that came before it. This kind of feeds into the third kind of fix. can very easily be added to the sentence that came behind them or the sentence that came in front of them. Check to see which one it works a little bit better with and add it in there. Just make sure you're using a comma to offset the dependent clause and the independent clause. If your sentence starts with a subordinating conjunction, we talk about that in my video about complex sentences. So make sure you're following that rule there as well. If you have any questions about fragments and how to fix them, feel free to email me at the email address you see on your screen or come by my office during the office hours listed in your syllabus. We've got an awesome group of tutors in L200 who are more than willing to help you out with this particular issue. And then probably my favorite grammar website for helping students because it gives you different kind of practice activities that you can do with this and explains it a little bit differently than I have. So